Hello and welcome to Logan Rando Aquascaping. My name is Logan and I'm really excited for today's video because I'm setting up the first ADA tank I've ever set up in my career as an aquascaper. It's an ADA 45P and it's sitting on the beautiful Archaea stand by Aqua Aquarium. It's a really good kind of beginner style footprint to work with because it's not so big that you'll have to do really huge water changes, and it's large enough where you won't feel super confined in the space. So I'm gonna walk you through my step-by-step process of how I set up a new tank all the way from the soil additives to planting, and then we're gonna dry start it for a few weeks because I just helped my roommate set up a UNS5N for her beta, and I donated a bunch of media for that. So I don't wanna take too much media out of my 60U right now. So we're gonna dry start this for a few weeks, which is only gonna help the plants. They'll grow in a little bit. So by the time we flood, they'll be in really, really good shape and rooted so they can absolutely thrive. So let's dive right into the build. So the first thing I did after setting up the tank on the cabinet and making sure that it was level was install the white background. So for me, having a background on the tank is a must. It just kind of helps with the immersion of the layout. When you can see the wall behind the tank, it's kind of distracting and takes you out of the layout. So I really recommend these. And if you can get your hands on the ADA brand Foggy Film, those are really great. I've used them in the past, but most of the time I end up going with a much cheaper one on Amazon. They're super easy to find. Just do a little bit of research. I've linked the one I'm using down below in the description. So once the background was installed and the stand and the tank were level, and I had the ONF Flat Nano on there, so I had plenty of light to work with, I got right to work setting up the substrate system. So anytime I set up a tank, I use the ADA additives below the substrate. I purchased these a few years ago because I was always curious about them, kind of, coming into the hobby, watching the Green Machine videos. So when I finally found some at my local fish store, I was like, oh, I gotta try these. And I gotta be honest, the jury is totally, out on whether or not these do anything. I'm just the type of guy who likes to kind of geek out on all these little potential, products that may improve your aquascape. So theoretically, what these additives do is they help create beneficial soil conditions. And what that basically means is it prevents anaerobic conditions. Anaerobic means low oxygen. When you have low oxygen in your substrate, that means that you can get some really nasty, bad bacteria that can kill off your plants, kill off your livestock. So these promote good bacteria growth, which ultimately leads to more oxygen down there. Whether or not these additives contribute to that, again, the jury is out, but I like trying these things and I have them, so I use them in all my tanks. In this case, I use Tourmaline BC as well as Bacter 100. Typically, I would also use Clear Super, but I was out of that at the moment, so I just had these two additives. And once the ADA additives were in the bottom of the tank, I kind of brushed them around to evenly distribute them. And then it was time to add the ADA nutrient supplements. So I'm using ADA Amazonia Soil version 2, and with this soil, they come with the nutrient capsules separate. So what I like to do is put them in on the bottom of the tank and then add the soil over that. So what I like to do is spread them out where I know I'm gonna have plant growth. In this case, I knew it was mostly gonna be the back left and back right corner, so I kind of concentrated it there. And then once those were in place, it was time to add the soil. So here was one of the more challenging aspects of this build. I am basing this build off a beautiful scape that I found on Instagram by an aquascaper named Cornyscapes. She's from Estonia, and we follow each other on Instagram, and her beautiful aquascape, Born to Be, came into my feed one day, and it was just one of those situations where I was like, wow, I have to have this in my home. If I could buy her aquascape, if it was in front of me, I totally would. So my only alternative was to create it myself. So I decided to do that and put my own little spin on it. So with this aquascape, we have two hills in the back of the tank that are sort of supported by stones in the midground. So I had to build up a hill on the left and a hill on the right and really build that arc up on the left and right. So that's really challenging because if you've ever worked with aqua soil, you know that, once you build it up a bit, it kind of like tumbles down. So there are a lot of different methods for doing that and preventing it from tumbling down. I've used kind of more high-tech methods in the past where I create terraces. These days, I kind of prefer to just support the substrate with rock, and eventually once the plants grow in and establish a root system, they'll help support it as well. So today I just kind of brushed it up with my hands and with a paintbrush and with my flat scraper as much as I could. And I knew that once the rocks would get in there, they would help support it as well. So I built up those 2 hills on the left and right as high as I could. And then once the rocks are in there, I plan on adding more substrate. So once that was done, I kind of took a step back, made sure I was happy with the composition. And today, because I'm filming the making of process, I have the luxury of having a monitor attached to my A camera. So I was constantly taking a step back and looking at the aquascape through a monitor at eye level, which is really, really invaluable when you're scaping. I cannot tell you how many times I've set up an aquascape where I'm like slightly above it, because you're always, a little bit taller than the tank, and you create your composition and your depth and your perspective from that sort of high up view. And then when you go to take a picture of it at eye level, it's just like totally not working. So even if it's just like your iPhone, set up on a little stand or something, have that going while you're aquascaping and constantly consult it, because you'll see it's a big difference between what that camera sees at eye level versus what your eyes see a bit higher than the tank. So once the soil was kind of in the position that I really wanted it to be, it was time to add the rocks. And today I am working with maple leaf stone, which is one of the most beautiful rocks I've ever come across in aquascaping. I started off by setting down my 2 mother stones, which would really form the basis of this layout. And the reason we have 2 mother stones in this tank is because we have those 2 hills that are kind of like twin highlights. So I got one on the left, one on the right, and once those were in place, that kind of helped support the substrate a bit. And at that point, it was time to add the additional stones. And as I was doing this, I was kind of consulting the Instagram picture from Cornyscapes, my inspiration. And that's really just a great tip if you're a beginner aquascaper, or even an intermediate one like myself, and you just don't have that natural eye for great composition. Find some inspiration. It's totally okay to copy in this hobby. This is a very friendly community. If you want to have something great that some other aquascaper has done, go ahead and print out a picture of it and work with it while you're scaping, and if you feel confident, you can always put your own twist on it so that it's original. And that's what I did today with this aquascape. I'm using completely different stones, I'm creating a slightly different perspective, and yeah, I'm also using different plants. So before adding the cosmetic sand, I decided to try a technique that I had seen on the Green Aqua YouTube channel, and that was to vacuum out some excess substrate that I didn't need. So I didn't have a shop vac, so I just stole my roommate's vacuum from her office when she wasn't looking. And yeah, it was actually pretty helpful. I was able to vacuum out that excess aqua soil that kind of made its way into the middle of the tank where I wanted the cosmetic sand, and really clear space for a nice thin layer of cosmetic sand. So next up, I added the cosmetic sand. So the cosmetic sand we're using today is the absolutely stunning ADA La Plata sand. This is a great sand because it has a lot of nuance and sort of fine textural and color variations. And I poured a very, very, very thin layer. And once the cosmetic sand was in place, I just kind of made sure it was nice and even in the front. I have a little bit of OCD when it comes to those things. I love, a perfectly flat line up front. So I was really happy with that, and I loved how it, sort of stood out from the stone. And then I worked really, really hard to kind of create some perspective and create a path that sort of vanished behind the right side of the aquascape. And this was probably the most challenging aspect for me. I really, really suck when it comes to perspective, unless I have like source material to work with. If you give me a design that I can sort of look at and copy and work with the perspective there, I can do a really good job. But in terms of creating perspective out of thin air, I just totally suck at it. So I really had to do a lot of trial and error, move a stone a few centimeters, go back behind my camera, see if it looked good, make another modification. But the effort was well worth it because I'm really happy with how the path turned out. And it's gonna draw your attention all the way to the back, which when we get to the planting and the plants are all grown in, will create something really cool. So now that the hardscaping is done and the cosmetic sand is in there, it is time to plant. So for today's build, we're using a bunch of Rotalas, and I absolutely love Rotalas. But whenever you're getting into stem plants like Rotalas, be prepared to do a lot of maintenance. Know going into your tank that these are fast growers, which is a good thing. It's gonna help fight algae. It's gonna, really suck up a lot of those excess nutrients and waste organics, but you gotta trim trim your Rotalas quite a bit. And if you want that really manicured look, you're looking at like every couple weeks, depending on the lighting and the CO2. So I started off on the left side with Amania Bonsai, which is actually the old name. Now it's just Rotala Bonsai. And I've kind of got that, you know, against the rocks and all around the left side. And then there's going to be highlights of Rotala H-Raw, which is just a beautiful, deep, bloody red, vibrant color. So we're gonna have really nice contrast between that yellowy green Rotala Bonsai and the Rotala H-Raw. And then I just kind of mimic that same type of layout on the right side. It's a little bit different, so it's not gonna be completely symmetrical, but you know, that's cool. That's how nature's chaos works. So I think that's gonna be really, really cool and vibrant. And Rotalas just grow so fast, so these will probably double in height, you know, in a week or so. The denser you can plant from the beginning, the better. And this is probably the densest I've ever planted. So I'm really excited about that. So next it was time to move on to the foreground. And for this, I had some Eleocharis pusilla, which I was able to kind of stick in the front. It'll kind of transition us from that cosmetic sand foreground to where the rocks begin. And I think it'll look really cool. I'll probably keep it really short. And I gotta say, it was really difficult to get into the foreground because the soil is very, very shallow there. So I did end up adding some extra soil. We'll see if that stays in place in a few days when I get a small plant order in. I'm also gonna add some Hemianthus cuba to kind of further lock down that soil and, you know, provide more of a transition. So once that was in place, I decided to glue some Hygrophila pinnatifida to sort of the rear foreground, early midground section. And I'm excited because I've never worked with this plant and I've seen so many beautiful aquascapes with it. Depending on the lighting and the CO2 and the nutrients, it can be anywhere from like a darker green to like a really bright red. So I'm excited to see how this will turn out. And right now it looks like really big and, you know, maybe it hurts the scale a little bit. But once the tank is flooded and everything's established, really regular trimmings where I kind of cut, replant, and continue to prune will get it that really tight, compact growth. Amato has a really beautiful aquascape he used with this. Yuri's has a really beautiful dentist aquascape he used with this. And both of them achieved that really dense kind of look. So I'm gonna go for that too. And, you know, between plantings, this took hours, so I'm constantly spraying to make sure that my plants don't dry out. But once everything was done, it was time to give it one big spray to set it up for the dry start. And here's a really important thing with the dry start. I've probably done 10 dry starts in the you know, 6 or 7 years I've been an aquascaper, and I've never had any issues. I remember years ago on the forums, dry starts were like the scariest thing for people. Everybody was, you know, afraid of melting plants and mold and mildew. I've never had any of those things, to be honest. So I think I've got the spraying down, and really what that entails is just not overspraying. You definitely want to like saturate the soil so that these beads of water kind of like start to flow down from the side onto the bottom, but you don't want pools of water. If you start getting standing water, that's where you're gonna run into trouble and you're gonna get things like mold and mildew. So just enough water where it starts to run down into the soil and, you know, everything is wet. And then every day you'll just open it for a few minutes. For me, it's usually like 10 minutes or so, small corner of the tank, let that gas exchange get in there, and you'll just kind of give the plants another quick spray. And just use your eye. You know, you almost can't underspray. It's easy to overspray though. So be conservative and just watch your plants, observe every day. I'll probably dry start this one for like 5 weeks or so, just so I can get my roommate through her beta tank. I don't want to be doing daily water changes on multiple tanks, you know, that are getting established. So I'm gonna let this one kind of grow out in the background, probably give it 5 weeks or so. But, you know, I've seen people dry start for months and months and months, you know, anywhere up to like 6 months. You could probably go longer if you want. It's just gonna get to the point where the plants will grow so tall that, you know, you may lose your composition. So keep an eye on things, but don't be afraid to dry start it if you still need time and need to save up for equipment. It's, you know, in my opinion, just a tried and true method. So I'm excited to see how this develops. And in the coming weeks, I'll keep you guys updated on the plant growth. And I'm really excited to flood it because I have some pretty cool ideas for what I want to stock in here. But I'd love to hear from you guys in this ADA 45P, which is about a 10-gallon tank. What do you guys think I should stock in this? I do want to limit it to a nano scoring annoying fish. So let me know what cool species you think would look great here with the Rotala H-Raw and the Rotala Bonsai and that red maple leaf stone. What do you think would really stand out? And I'm open to shrimp too. I love shrimp. I've successfully kept Caridina in these water conditions now for a few months. So sky's the limit when it comes to keeping shrimp. I'll definitely be keeping softer conditions. So if you have any suggestions, let me know down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.